we have a very special guest with us with a presentation called Freedom is Not Free. Please welcome Brigadier General Robert E. Wheeler. First off, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for letting me be here today. It's truly an honor to be a part of this presentation, especially as a first time here, so it is a true honor. I'd like to make a couple of comments here up front and a story that I shared with you on what happened to me on 9/11. As we commemorate the 10th anniversary of 9/11, we are once again reminded that freedom isn't free. In a few minutes, we will have a memorial 21 gun salute by the American Legion and the Ralston Honor Guard. That 21 gun salute will have representatives from conflicts that cover nearly 100 years. Will be a 91-year-old combat vet from World War II. Will be from Korea. Will be a combat vet from Vietnam and Afghanistan and Iraq. Each of these conflicts has its moments in history and memories that will never be forgotten. But there is a common thread throughout all of these conflicts. That common thread is the fact that freedom is not free. Let me give you a few statistics. World War I, 113,000 dead Americans, 225,000 wounded Americans. World War II, 418,000 American dead, 670,000 wounded Americans, with a eye-popping total of 22 to 25 million dead people throughout the world. Korea, 36,500 dead Americans, 92,100 wounded Americans. I was recently in Korea. I got to see that conflict is far from over today. In the recent past history, I got to witness a ship called the Chinonan. The Chinonan is a South Korean vessel that was torpedoed by the North Koreans in the last 2 years. That ship goes from about the side of that fence over there to about the middle of that building. It was split in half by what's called a bubble torpedo that lifts the ship in half, and 46 people who were eating dinner downstairs in the galley perished instantaneously, followed up by an artillery barrage on a small island in South Korea called Waipido. They are still fighting that today, and that conflict still continues on to this moment. Vietnam, 58,000 dead Americans, 153,000 wounded Americans. The war on terror, today over 5,800 Americans have lost their lives with 42,000 wounded. Let us also not forget, in each of these conflicts, the first responders who gave their lives. In the 9/11 alone, 343 firemen lost their lives with 23 police officers that particular day, with numbers now approaching 1,000 for our first responders. In fact, the first recorded victim from 9/11 was a fireman. That fireman was Father Mike, Chaplain Father Mike. He was killed by falling debris while administering last rites to 3 individuals who were also severely injured. There's another common theme in these conflicts, besides freedom isn't free. It's a simple fact that these conflicts were not about conquest or revenge, but rather about what's doing right as a nation and stopping those who would make this world very different today. Consider the fact that if we had not been in those conflicts, we would not be having this meeting today, and we would have to be explained to our children and our children's children what we found that was more precious than freedom. Each of us has a 9/11 story, and I'd like you to share mine. I was a squadron commander of a B-2 squadron, which is a stealth bomber, the large Batwing type aircraft out of Missouri during 9/11. I was asleep that morning because I had been up all night working on an operation that we were going through. It was an exercise, and the inspector was there checking to make sure we were combat ready for some unknown conflict in the future. My deputy commander woke me up that morning to tell me what was going on in the middle of this exercise, and I came in immediately. I spent the next 36 and a half hours up trying to prepare for what would happen next and how we would take the fight to the enemy at that particular time. My daughter that morning happened to be in the child care center when that particular incident occurred with the buildings being hit by those 2 airplanes. The base was locked down. We didn't know when the next airplane was going to be hit. We assumed it would be at one of our bases because we held all those combat airplanes, and they were all brought into a center part of the building as if there was a bomb outside someplace, and all the children were kept there to be held to make sure that they could be as safe as possible, so we didn't know what was happening next. Over the next few weeks, we prepared and waited for that moment to launch our particular sorties out of Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri to whatever we would have to do to take out the enemy at that particular time. A date came on the 6th of October. I actually received the phone call and was told to launch within 4 hours. On the 6th of October, we launched the first 3 B-2s from the middle of Missouri, flying the longest combat sorties in history of 44.7 hours into Afghanistan and landing in Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. I still remember that small cadre of folks on the runway with tears rolling down their faces as those airplanes took off. Before they took off, though, in the bomb bays, we took a piece of paper and we took every single fireman, every single policeman, and we took a piece of chalk. And on every one of those 48 weapons that were first released there, we wrote the names of those particular individuals. They were written in chalk. We flew those missions, and those missions were flown by my squadron and landed in Diego Garcia. There's a lanyard that pulls out the fuse. And it's about 36 inches long, and it's a cable that was in there. When we brought those sorties back to the United States, we took all those cables from those particular airplanes and we presented them to the families in the fire departments of New York City. And that was our covenant with them. It wasn't done out of revenge, it wasn't done out of conquest or payback, but it was our covenant with them that we would do everything in our power to never let that happen again to our nation. The 6th of October is when those launches occurred in 2001. It's nearly 10 years later to those first combat launches, and we're still at war today. A time frame that's over 2.5 times the length of World War II, and it does wear on our nation. We continue to fight this fight against violent extremists across the world who will use terrorism as a methodology of choice. They seek weapons of mass destruction, and if they're successful, we'll attempt to use them in our conflict against free people everywhere. But our nation is also resilient. It was another September 11th, in 1941, 3 months before Pearl Harbor, that President Franklin Roosevelt addressed the nation about another menace, Nazi terror, emerging in Europe, some 70 years ago today. This was 3 months before Pearl Harbor. As President Roosevelt spoke to the nation in a fireside chat that evening, he said, "The American people have faced other grave crises in their history with American courage and with American resolution. They will do no less today. They know the necessities of a bold defense against these attacks. They know that these times call for clear hands and fearless hearts. And with an inner strength that comes to a free people, conscious of their duty and conscious of the righteousness of what they do, they will stand their ground against this latest assault upon their democracy, their sovereignty, and their freedom. Fellow Americans, we will do no less today, and we will continue to prevail." Thank you.